The smell hit me first. It wasn't the clean, earthy scent of rain on hot asphalt, or the sharp tang of ozone from the lightning that had just knocked out our power. It was something else. Something fragrant. Like a cheap car air freshener and a chemical spill had a baby. A very, very sparkly baby. I angled the beam of my mag light down into the fuel tank of the community generator. The diesel fuel, which I had personally topped off last week with 5 gallons of the good stuff, was no longer a translucent, reassuring amber. It was a murky, swirling gray soup, shot through with what appeared to be the entire glitter inventory of a Michael's craft store. Suds clung to the sides of the tank, iridescent bubbles popping slowly in the suffocating humidity. "What in the ever-loving hell?" Mark Henderson from number 42 muttered beside me. He was holding his 6-month-old daughter, who was thankfully asleep, oblivious to the fact her formula was currently warming to a bacterially questionable temperature in their very dumb smart fridge. My flashlight beam drifted from the contaminated tank and landed on a figure standing a few feet away, arms crossed, silhouetted against the strobing flashes of lightning. The posture was unmistakable. It was the stance of someone who has just done something they believe to be profoundly righteous and is waiting for the world to catch up. It was Carol. Of course, it was Carol. In one hand, she held an empty plastic bottle of Sunshine Meadows plant-based biodegradable dish soap. In the other, a large, crinkled, and very empty bag that read, "Eco-friendly craft glitter." My jaw tightened. Every muscle in my body went taut. The carefully constructed dam of suburban politeness that I'd spent 6 years building in this neighborhood began to crack. Behind that dam was a swirling reservoir of unfiltered NCO-grade frustration, and Carol was tap-dancing on it in studded cleats. "Carol," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "What did you do?" She tilted her chin up, the very picture of smug defiance. "I took a stand for our planet, David. That machine is a menace. We should be embracing the quiet dignity of a powerless evening, reflecting on our consumption, not polluting our pristine air with petroleum particulates just so Todd can play his video games." From the darkness behind me, a panicked voice shrieked, "My Wi-Fi is down. My smart fridge is tweeting error codes. I have artisanal cheeses in there. Carol, artisanal." Todd from number 38, a man who wore Bluetooth earpieces even when he slept, sounded like he was on the verge of a complete system crash. Carol waved a dismissive hand. "The Earth doesn't care about your imported breed, Todd. Besides," she added, shaking the soap bottle for emphasis, "I used biodegradable soap. It's perfectly harmless." I stared at her, then back at the glittery sludge that was once 50 gallons of perfectly good diesel fuel. Harmless, right. Biodegradable or not, the inside of a high-compression diesel engine doesn't typically run well on a unicorn's bubble bath. This wasn't a protest. This was sabotage. This was a declaration of war. And she had just declared it on a former Army logistics sergeant who now spent his days managing multi-million-dollar construction projects. She had picked the wrong man, the wrong generator, and the wrong goddamn night. It had all started so innocently, as most suburban horror stories do. 3 hours earlier, I was standing on my perfectly edged lawn, basking in the late afternoon sun. My grass was precisely 2.5 inches high, a lush green carpet that was the result of a soil analysis, a carefully calibrated blend of fertilizer, and a sprinkler system I could control from my phone. I was a man who appreciated order. In my hand, I held a piece of paper, freshly laminated, of course. It was a violation notice. Maple Creek Estates Homeowners Association. Official notice of bylaw infraction. Violation, Section 7. 4. Improper storage of garden implements. Description: garden hose on property, 3434, was not coiled in a visually pleasing concentric circle pattern. The hose exhibited a figure 8 configuration, which is expressly forbidden as per the 2023 revised Aesthetic Harmony Accords. Remedy, coil hose to code specifications within 24 hours. Penalty for non-compliance. $50 fine. I stared at the notice, then at my dark green garden hose, which was coiled in a perfectly functional, if not aesthetically transcendent, oval. This was life in Maple Creek Estates, a neighborhood so obsessed with curb appeal that it had somehow managed to legislate joy out of existence. It was a place where the color of your mailbox could lead to a formal hearing, and where decorative lawn gnomes were considered a Class B misdemeanor. And the architect of this perfectly manicured hell was Carol Peterson, HOA president, self-appointed queen of the cul-de-sac, and a woman whose personal vendetta against me burned with the heat of 1,000 suns. Or, more accurately, 1,000 sunflowers. Last summer, I'd had the audacity to grow a row of them along my back fence. They grew to an unapproved height of 9 feet, blocking, as she claimed in a tearful Facebook post, the harmonious sightline of her prize-winning petunias. The fact that her petunias were, in fact, dandelions is a point she and I will forever disagree on. I crumpled the notice in my fist just as my wife, Sarah, opened the front door. "Don't let her get to you," she said, reading the situation in a single glance. "It's not worth the aneurysm." "It's the lamination that gets me," I grumbled. "It's so permanent, so smug." Inside, the TV was on, a weatherman pointing at a swirling mass of red and yellow on the Doppler radar that was currently making a beeline for our county. "Folks, this is not a drill," he said with practiced gravity. "We're looking at a major thunderstorm cell, potential for hail, high winds, and widespread power outages." My gaze drifted out the window towards the small, beige utility shed on the community green. The backup generator. I'd spent 6 months of my life fighting for that thing, attending soul-crushing HOA meetings, presenting cost-benefit analyses, and patiently explaining to Carol that, no, a community drum circle was not an adequate substitute for emergency power. She'd fought me every step of the way, calling the generator a noisy, fossil fuel-belching eyesore. I finally won the vote, but it cemented my status as her arch-nemesis. I pulled out my phone and started my pre-storm ritual. I checked the batteries in our flashlights, made sure the power banks were at 100%, and double-checked the propane level on the grill. Preparedness is a state of mind. In the Army, it kept you alive. In the suburbs, it kept your ice cream from melting. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my best friend, Mike. We'd served together, him in transport, me in logistics. We were the guys who figured out how to move mountains of stuff from point A to point B, usually when point B was on fire. Now he owned a massive equipment rental company. "Mike, gotta love storm prep. Tying down $250,000 worth of excavators so they don't blow into the next county. How's life on Easy Street?" Me, currently under threat of a $50 fine for an improperly coiled hose. The horror. "Mike, stay strong, brother. The suburbs are a different kind of war." He had no idea. Sarah came into the living room drying her hands on a towel. "Did you remember to check the fuel on the big generator this week?" "I topped it off last week," I replied, feeling a surge of smug satisfaction. I was that guy, the prepared one. 50 gallons of premium diesel. Even Carol can't complain about a full tank. I think. The sky outside had turned a bruised, sickly shade of purple. The wind began to pick up, whistling through the eaves. Then came the first fat drops of rain, smacking against the windows. Within minutes, it was a torrential downpour. The lights flickered once, twice. We held our breath. They flickered a third time and then died, plunging the world into a sudden, profound darkness. The silence was the next thing to hit. The hum of the refrigerator, the whine of the air conditioner, the faint buzz of the TV, all gone. All you could hear was the roar of the wind and the drumming of the rain, and then a new sound, a distant, mechanical rumble. The generator. It coughed to life, its diesel engine settling into a steady, reassuring thrum. One by one, the lights in Maple Creek Estates flickered back on. A collective sigh of relief seemed to roll through the neighborhood. From his porch across the street, Todd the tech bro let out a triumphant whoop. "The Wi-Fi is back! We are saved!" he yelled into the storm, his face illuminated by the glow of his phone. The generator ran for exactly 5 minutes. 5 glorious, air-conditioned, Wi-Fi-enabled minutes. Then it sputtered, it coughed, a sick, metallic sound that carried over the rain. It choked, sputtered again, and died with a sickening final clunk. Darkness returned, and this time the silence that followed felt heavy and deeply, deeply wrong. Which brought me back to the present, staring into a tank full of unicorn vomit, with the saboteur herself standing proudly over her handiwork. The little crowd of neighbors gathered around the generator shed was in an uproar. Todd was frantically refreshing his phone, as if sheer force of will could resurrect the dead Wi-Fi signal. The Hendersons were huddled together, whispering worriedly, and Carol was holding court, defending her act of eco-terrorism with the unshakable conviction of the truly delusional. "It's for the greater good," she proclaimed, her voice rising to be heard over the rain. "Think of the carbon footprint. A few hours of inconvenience is a small price to pay for a healthier planet." "My baby's monitor is off, Carol," Mrs. Henderson cried out, her voice trembling. "I can't hear him if he's in distress." "The human ear is a perfectly capable baby monitor, dear," Carol replied, condescendingly. "Mothers have been using them for millennia." I'd had enough. This wasn't a debate club. This was a tactical problem. My property was secure, my family was safe, but my community was compromised. And the chain of command, in this case, the HOA board, had gone rogue. Time for a new plan of action. I ignored Carol, turned my back on the chaos, and walked a few feet away, pulling my phone from my pocket. The screen was slick with rain. I shielded it with my hand and scrolled to my favorites. I pressed the call button next to Mike's name. He answered on the second ring. "You're not going to believe this," I said, skipping the pleasantries. "Let me guess," Mike's voice crackled through the speaker. "HOA lady finally declared squirrels a public nuisance and is demanding they wear tiny government-mandated uniforms? Worse. So much worse. She glitter-bombed the community generator's fuel supply. Power's out for the whole neighborhood. The entire 50-gallon tank is trashed." There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line, followed by a bark of incredulous laughter. "No way, you're kidding me. Glitter-bombed? Like with actual glitter?" "And soap, Mike. Plant-based, biodegradable dish soap, her words. The engine is dead, the fuel is a total loss." Holy cow, that's next-level crazy, even for her. He paused, and I could practically hear the gears turning in his head. "So what's the play, Dave? You want me to bring over a couple of portable generators?" "No," I said. A new, beautiful, and gloriously oversized idea blossoming in my mind. "I need a bigger solution. I need to make a statement. Hey, that fuel bowser you were prepping for the highway job tomorrow? Is it full?" Another pause. This one longer, laced with dawning comprehension and sheer, unadulterated glee. "The big one? The 1,000-gallon tow behind? The one that looks like a bright yellow torpedo?" "That's the one." "Yeah," Mike said slowly, savoring the moment. "Filled her to the brim this afternoon. Got 1,000 gallons of ultra-low sulfur diesel sitting right here. Why? How fast can you get it to my address?" A long, delighted chuckle echoed down the line. "Oh, this is gonna be beautiful. This is the kind of petty, malicious compliance I live for. I'll be there in 20 minutes. You owe me big time for this, buddy. Steak dinner, at least." "You got it," I said, a slow grin spreading across my face. "And Mike? Drive safe, but not too safe." I hung up and turned back to the demoralized crowd. "Don't worry," I announced, projecting my voice over the storm. "I've got a refueling solution on the way." Carol scoffed, a smug little sound of derision. "What are you going to do, David? Show up with a few gas cans? It's far too late for that. The damage is done." "Oh, I think you'll find my solution is a little more substantial," I said. The next 19 minutes were a masterclass in suburban meltdown. Todd paced back and forth, muttering about his crypto portfolio tanking. The Hendersons decided to take their baby and sleep in their car for the AC. Mr. Henderson from down the street, a grumpy Vietnam vet who rarely spoke to anyone, just stood there under his big golf umbrella, watching me with a look of shrewd curiosity. Then, we heard it. It started as a low rumble, a vibration you felt in the soles of your feet more than you heard with your ears. It grew steadily, a deep-throated diesel growl that was utterly alien to our quiet little corner of the world. It wasn't the sound of a minivan or an SUV. It was the sound of heavy metal. Heads turned towards the entrance of the cul-de-sac. A pair of powerful LED headlights cut through the sheets of rain, sweeping across our soaked lawns. The source of the rumble, Mike's massive Ford F-350 Dually, turned into our street. And behind it, towed like a prize marlin, was the fuel Bowser. It was magnificent. It was a 1,000-gallon, dual-axle, bright yellow beast of a machine. It was caked in a respectable layer of job site mud, emblazoned with the Mike's Heavy Equipment logo, and festooned with more reflective tape and warning labels than a nuclear submarine. It was an instrument of industry, a glorious, unapologetic monument to fossil fuels. And it looked as out of place in Maple Creek Estates as a monster truck at a tea party. Mike, a master of his craft, didn't just pull up. He executed a flawless three-point turn and reverse-parked the entire rig, positioning the massive yellow tank directly in front of Carol's house. He parked it so perfectly that her prize-winning, and still not Petunia's, flower bed was now the Bowser's front-row audience. With a final hiss of the air brakes, the truck and trailer settled, its amber warning lights strobing rhythmically, casting an apocalyptic glow across the manicured lawns. The entire neighborhood stood in stunned, rain-soaked silence. Jaws were, without exaggeration, on the pavement. Carol's face had gone from smug to shocked to a pale, quivering shade of incandescent rage. The driver's side door of the F-350 swung open, and Mike hopped out, a grin splitting his face. He spread his arms wide, embracing the scene of suburban chaos he had just amplified by a factor of 10. "Special delivery," he boomed, his voice carrying over the idling engine. "Who ordered the extra-large can of whoop-ass?" From under his umbrella, Mr. Henderson let out a slow, appreciative whistle. "Son," he said, his voice thick with respect, "I haven't seen a beautiful sight like that since Da Nang." Carol finally found her voice. It came out as a strangled shriek. She fumbled for her phone, her fingers stabbing at the screen. 911! I'm calling 911! There's an unauthorized industrial vehicle. He's brought a bomb into our neighborhood. It's a hazardous waste situation. I just leaned against the wet generator shed and crossed my arms. The overture was over. It was time for the main event. You can set your watch by the response time for a bomb threat in a wealthy suburb, even one as transparently ridiculous as Carol's. 7 minutes later, a police cruiser, its lights painting the rain-slicked street in strobing blues and reds, rolled silently into our cul-de-sac. 2 officers emerged. their faces illuminated by the rhythmic flash of Mike's warning lights. They were a study in contrasts. The first, Officer Miller, was older, with a weary, seen-it-all slump to his shoulders and a mustache that had probably been issuing citations since the Nixon administration. His partner, Officer Chen, was younger, sharper, with an alert, intelligent gaze that took in the whole absurd tableau in a single sweep. The massive fuel bowser, the gaggle of rain-soaked residents, Carol flapping her arms like an agitated flamingo, and me, the guy trying very hard to look like a reasonable man in an unreasonable situation. "Evening, folks," Officer Miller said, his voice a gravelly baritone of profound exhaustion. "Got a call about a hazardous situation? Someone want to tell me why I'm missing the end of the baseball game for this?" Carol surged forward, pointing a trembling finger at me, then at the Bowser. "Him, officer. He brought this bomb into our neighborhood. It's a violation of at least a dozen city ordinances, not to mention the HOA bylaws. He's endangering our children." Officer Miller's gaze drifted from Carol to the Bowser, then to me. There wasn't a flicker of alarm in his eyes, only a deep, bone-weary resignation. "Ma'am, that's a fuel Bowser. It's construction equipment. Unless he's planning on lighting a match, it's not a bomb." "Officer," I said, stepping forward, keeping my hands visible and my tone level. "My name is Dave. I live here. A few minutes ago, this woman," I gestured to Carol, "deliberately sabotaged our community's emergency generator during a blackout by pouring an entire bottle of soap and a bag of glitter into the fuel tank." Officer Chen raised an eyebrow. "Glitter?" "Eco-friendly glitter," Carol snapped. "There's a difference." I ignored her. "I was just trying to get the power back on for my neighbors. We have a family with a newborn here who are getting worried about the heat. This," I swept my arm towards the magnificent yellow beast, "is the refueling solution." Officer Chen turned her full attention to Carol, her expression hardening slightly. "Ma'am, is that true? Did you put soap in the generator?" "It was a peaceful protest," Carol insisted, her voice cracking. "It was biodegradable. I was exercising my right to protect our shared environment from toxic pollutants." Officer Miller sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of every ridiculous domestic dispute he'd ever been called to. He looked back at me. "This vehicle, is it street legal? Registered? Insured?" Mike stepped up, pulling a laminated binder from the cab of his truck. "Logistics guys love lamination as much as HOA presidents do. It's the great unifier." "Yes, sir, officer. All our paperwork is right here. We are a fully licensed and bonded equipment rental company out of Westbury. Vehicle is registered for road use. All permits are up to date." Miller took the binder and gave it a cursory flip-through under the beam of his flashlight. He handed it back to Mike. He then looked at Carol, his face a perfect mask of professional neutrality. "Ma'am, as far as I can see, there is no law against parking a legally registered and insured commercial vehicle on a public street, provided it's not blocking traffic, which it isn't." He paused, letting the weight of his next words sink in. "However, deliberately destroying community property, especially emergency equipment, is a crime. It's called vandalism, possibly reckless endangerment given the circumstances." Carol's face went white. "Now," Miller continued, his voice dropping into a tone of finality, "this sounds like a civil matter for you and your HOA to sort out. We're not here to interpret your bylaws about garden hoses." He shot me a quick, almost imperceptible glance. "But my professional advice to you, ma'am," he said, looking squarely at Carol, "is to quit while you're behind. Go back inside. Let these folks sort out their power situation. Do we have an understanding?" Carol stood there, sputtering, opening and closing her mouth like a fish. She had summoned the authorities to smite her enemies, and they had turned on her. Defeated, she shot me a look of pure, venomous hatred, spun on her heel, and stomped back to her house, slamming the door behind her. The officers lingered for another moment. "Try to keep the noise down," Officer Chen said, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. "Will do, officer," I said. As they walked back to their cruiser, Officer Miller glanced back over his shoulder. He caught my eye and gave me a slow, subtle nod of approval. It was the universal sign for, "I get it. That lady's nuts. Carry on." The cruiser pulled away, and a small, spontaneous cheer went up from the assembled neighbors. We had won the battle. But as I turned my attention back to the generator, I had a sinking feeling the war was far from over. "All right, Mike," I said, clapping my hands together. "Let's get this thing refueled." We popped the maintenance panel on the generator and got a better look at the situation. It was worse than I thought. The soapy, glittery diesel hadn't just contaminated the tank. A quick check of the primary fuel filter showed it was completely clogged with a thick, shimmering sludge, like a disastrous kindergarten art project. "Uh-oh," Mike said, poking at the filter with a screwdriver. "This is bad, Dave." "How bad?" Bad, he confirmed. "This gunk isn't just in the tank, it's been sucked into the fuel lines. The injector pump is probably gummed up, and the injectors themselves are likely fouled. We can't just drain it and add new fuel. We'd just be pushing this crap straight into the engine. We could seize the whole thing." My heart sank. My glorious 1,000-gallon solution was sitting right there, and it was completely useless. We didn't just need fuel, we needed a mechanic, an emergency mechanic. In the middle of a thunderstorm at night. "This is going to be expensive," I muttered, pulling out my phone again. The next 45 minutes were a descent into automated phone menu hell. One company after another either didn't answer, had an answering service that promised a call back within 2 business days, or straight up laughed at me when I described the problem. "You're telling me someone poured glitter in your diesel generator?" one guy asked before hanging up. I was on my last hope, a number I'd gotten from a guy on a construction site years ago, scribbled on the back of a business card I kept in my wallet. The card was faded, bearing only a name and a number. Gus's generator and engine repair. We fixed stupid. I dialed. It rang 4 times, and I was about to give up when a gravelly, irritated voice answered with a single word. "Yeah?" "Hi, is this Gus?" I asked. "Who's asking?" "My name's Dave. I've got an emergency with a 50-kilowatt diesel generator, and I was hoping you could help." "It's 10 o'clock at night in the middle of a biblical flood, son. I ain't hoping to do nothing but watch my stories. What's the problem?" I took a deep breath. Someone poured a gallon of dish soap and about 2 pounds of craft glitter into the fuel tank. There was a long, silent pause on the other end of the line. I thought he'd hung up. Then a low, dry chuckle. "Soap and glitter? You're kidding me." "I wish I were," I said, the desperation creeping into my voice. "It's the backup generator for my whole neighborhood. We've got families, kids." Yeah, I get it," he grunted. "All right, but you ain't gonna like the price. Emergency call-out fee is $500. That's just for me to put my pants on and get in the truck. Parts and labor are extra, and my labor rate doubles after 10 p.m. He paused. "And my watch says it's 10:05. I didn't even hesitate. "Get here." "Cash, check, or credit card? I take 'em all, and I expect payment up front," he said, and the line went dead. I turned to my small, huddled group of neighbors. "Okay, folks," I said. "I've got a mechanic on the way. He's a miracle worker, apparently. But he's pricey." I told them the number. A collective groan went through the crowd. Todd looked like he was going to be sick. But then Mr. Henderson pulled a worn leather wallet from his back pocket. "I've got 100, he said, his voice firm. Mark Henderson, the young dad, pulled out his own wallet. "We can do 150. One by one, they came forward. Todd zapped $200 to my Venmo. Others offered what they could, $40, $60, $20. Within 5 minutes, we had pooled together more than enough to cover Gus's fee. It was no longer just my problem, it was ours, and we were going to see it through. Gus arrived 40 minutes later in a service truck that looked like it had been salvaged from a Mad Max movie set. It was a 1980s Ford F-250, its original color lost under a patchwork of rust, primer, and grime. Every body panel was dented, but the tires were new, and the engine hummed with a well-maintained power. The utility bed in the back was a chaotic jumble of tools, spare parts, and greasy rags. Gus himself was cut from the same cloth, short, stocky, with a grizzled gray beard, hands permanently stained with grease, and a face that looked like it had been used to hammer out dents. He killed the engine, got out of the truck without a word, and ambled over to the generator. Mike and I parted to let him pass. He unscrewed the fuel cap, shined a cheap, powerful flashlight into the tank, and let out a dry, humorless chuckle. "Well, that's a new one," he grunted, his voice like gravel in a coffee can. He looked up at me. "Did a unicorn throw up in here?" "Something like that," I said. Gus spent the next few minutes doing a thorough diagnosis, his movements economical and precise. He grunted, he poked, he sniffed. Finally, he straightened up and wiped his hands on an already filthy rag. "All right," he announced to the waiting crowd. "Pump's probably shot. Injectors are definitely fouled. Filters are garbage. The whole fuel system needs to be drained and flushed from the tank to the engine block." He looked at me. "It's gonna be a messy son of a bitch of a job, and it's gonna take a while." "Can you do it?" I asked. "I can rebuild a diesel engine with a pair of pliers and some baling wire if I have to," he said, not boasting, just stating a fact. "But it won't be cheap. You got my fee?" I handed him the wad of cash the neighborhood had collected. He counted it once, folded it, and stuffed it into his shirt pocket without ceremony. "All right, let's get to work. You." He pointed a thick, greasy finger at me. "You're my assistant. Hold the light. Don't talk unless I ask you a question, and for God's sake, try not to get in my way." And so began the great generator resurrection. Gus was a whirlwind of profane, greasy efficiency. He produced a hand-crank pump and a set of empty 55-gallon drums from his truck and began the laborious process of draining the 50 gallons of glittery sludge from the main tank. The smell was horrendous. My job was, as instructed, to hold the very bright work light he'd set up and hand him tools. "Give me the 9/16 socket," he'd grunt, and I'd rummage through his chaotic toolbox. "No, the other one. The deep well, you idiot." The neighborhood watch party grew. People brought out lawn chairs, positioning them at a respectful distance. Someone started a small fire in a portable fire pit. Mrs. Henderson brought out a tray of coffee and passed it around. It was surreal. We were a little community, huddled in the dark and the rain, watching a grumpy old wizard perform arcane mechanical rites to save us from the forces of chaos and glitter. We were about 2 hours into the repair when a new threat emerged. The front door of Carol's house creaked open. She emerged from the darkness, a woman on a mission. She was wearing a raincoat now, and she was carrying a large, heavy 3-ring binder. I knew that binder. It was the Holy Scripture of Maple Creek Estates. It was the collected bylaws, covenants, and restrictions. She marched right up to the edge of the light cast by our work lamp, her face set in a grim, determined mask. "Cease and desist," she announced, her voice ringing with officious authority. She opened the binder to a page marked with a pink sticky tab. Per the Maple Creek Estates Homeowners Association Bylaws, Section 14, Subsection C, and I quote, all maintenance, repair, or modification of community-owned property must be performed by a board-approved and pre-vetted vendor following a minimum of 3 competitive bids. She looked up, a triumphant gleam in her eyes. "This grease monkey," she gestured disdainfully at Gus, "is not on our approved vendor list. You are all in violation. This entire procedure is illegal." Gus, who was halfway under the generator disconnecting a fuel line, didn't even bother to look up. His voice was a muffled growl. "Lady, I'm vetted by the state of Texas and the god that made diesel engines. Now get out of my light before I start charging you for obstruction." Carol was not deterred. She pulled out her phone, the screen casting a ghoulish light on her face. "I am filming this for legal action. This is evidence. You will all be receiving fines for this. I am live streaming this to the community Facebook page right now. Everyone will see this reign of terror by these rogue elements." She started narrating into her phone, providing a running commentary of our supposed crimes. "As you can see, they have brought in an unvetted operative who is currently dismantling community property, creating an environmental hazard." That was when it happened. Mr. Henderson, the quiet Vietnam vet, slowly got up from his lawn chair. He walked over and stood directly in front of Carol, his back to her, completely blocking her view of the generator. He just stood there, a silent, unmovable wall of disapproval. He didn't say a word. A moment later, Todd, the tech bro, phone forgotten, came and stood next to him. Then Mark Henderson, the young father. Then his wife. One by one, my neighbors left their chairs and their cups of coffee and formed a line. A silent, human wall between Carol and us. They stood shoulder to shoulder in the rain, a motley, determined line of suburban solidarity. They blocked her camera. They blocked her view. They blocked her toxic, rule-obsessed nonsense from reaching us. Carol stared at the wall of her neighbors' backs. Her narration faltered. She tried to peer around them, but they shifted, closing the gaps. She was completely, utterly shut out. Her weapon, the bylaws, the public shaming, the rules, was useless. For the first time all night, she looked truly defeated. With a final, choked sob of frustration, she lowered her phone, turned, and retreated into the darkness of her house. The human wall disassembled, and everyone went back to their seats as if nothing had happened. A quiet understanding passed between us all. We were in this together. Gus finally slid out from under the generator, covered head to toe in a shimmering film of greasy, soapy diesel. "All right," he grunted, holding up a clogged fuel injector. "Found the problem. Got the new parts in the truck. Give me another hour." The end was in sight. The final hour was a frantic ballet of wrenches, gaskets, and muttered curses from Gus. He worked with a speed and precision that was mesmerizing to watch. He replaced the entire fuel line, installed a new injector pump, and swapped out all the fouled injectors with shiny new ones. The pile of discarded, glitter-encrusted parts grew on the tarp beside him. Finally, he stood up, wiping his hands on his rag for the 100th time. He surveyed his work, giving a final, tightening twist to a bolt. "All right," he announced, his voice carrying in the now quiet night. The storm had passed, leaving behind a cool, clean air. "She's clean. The lines are flushed, new parts are in. Let's see if she'll drink the good stuff." This was the moment of truth. All eyes went from Gus to the magnificent yellow Bowser, standing sentinel in the street. Mike, who had been watching the whole procedure with the keen interest of a fellow professional, sprang into action. He uncoiled a long, thick hose from the Bowser's reel and dragged the nozzle over to the generator. He screwed it firmly into the generator's fuel intake. "Ready when you are, Dave," Mike yelled. "Flip the pump," I called back. Mike hit a switch on the side of the Bowser. A low hum started, and we could see the fuel pulsing through a clear section of the hose. Pristine, clean, life-giving diesel, completely free of soap and sparkles. It flowed into the generator's empty, freshly cleaned tank. After a few minutes, Gus held up a hand. "That's good. Give it a prime." He bled the air from the new fuel lines, a process he completed with the casual expertise of a man who had done it 10,000 times. He looked at me. "You did all this," he said, gesturing vaguely at the Bowser and the crowd. "You get the honors." He held out the ignition key. I took it. It felt heavy with the weight of the night's absurdity. I walked to the control panel, the eyes of the entire neighborhood on me. I put the key in the ignition. I hesitated for a split second, sending a silent prayer to whatever deity oversees internal combustion engines. I turned the key. The engine cranked, once, twice. The sound of the starter motor was agonizingly slow. My heart was in my throat. "Come on, baby, come on." It cranked a third time, then sputtered. A puff of white smoke came out of the exhaust. It sputtered again, caught, and then with a deafening roar that shattered the midnight silence, the engine roared to life. It wasn't the sick, coughing sound from before. This was a healthy, powerful, thunderous bellow. It was the sound of victory. A massive, spontaneous cheer erupted from the crowd of neighbors. People were hugging, high-fiving, laughing. And then, one by one, the lights flashed on in the houses around the cul-de-sac. Porch lights, living room windows, street lights, all bursting into life. From his lawn chair, Todd held his phone aloft like the Statue of Liberty's torch. "The Alexa is back online!" he screamed in pure ecstasy. "She's playing We Are the Champions!" And sure enough, from his open window, we could hear the faint, tinny sound of Freddie Mercury's triumphant voice carrying across the lawns. It was the most beautiful, ridiculous, and perfect moment I had ever experienced. Our impromptu block party lasted for another hour, powered by the steady thrum of the generator and 1,000 gallons of glorious diesel. Grills that had been dormant were fired up. People brought out coolers of beer and bags of chips. Music played from open windows. We had faced down the darkness and the glitter and won. I was holding a burger in one hand and a beer in the other when the remaining members of the HOA board, two reasonable women named Brenda and Sharon, approached me. They looked exhausted but relieved. "Dave," Brenda said, "we saw Carol's live stream and the 57 furious comments underneath it. We are so sorry." "It's not your fault," I said. "You can't legislate crazy." "We wanted to thank you, and to settle up." She gestured towards Gus, who was sitting contentedly in a lawn chair, demolishing a plate of potato salad. "What do we owe him? And you for the, fuel?" I gave them the final, eye-watering figure for Gus's bill, plus the cost of the 100 or so gallons of diesel we'd used. They didn't flinch. They held an emergency board meeting right there on Brenda's lawn, under the glow of a street lamp. It took less than 5 minutes. "We voted," Sharon announced when they returned, "unanimously. Carol is being fined for the full cost of the repairs and the fuel, citing bylaw 18.6, willful destruction of community property. She'll get the bill tomorrow." The next morning, the main grid power was restored. A little after 9, Mike arrived to retrieve his chariot. He gave a long, triumphant blast of the F-350's air horn as he drove past Carol's house, towing the now slightly less full Bowser behind him. I never saw her face, but I imagined it. By noon, official laminated notices, the irony was not lost on me, were posted on the community message board. An emergency all-hands community meeting was called for Saturday. The agenda had only one item: a vote of no confidence in the leadership of President Carol Peterson. The meeting was standing room only. The vote was not even close. Carol was stripped of her presidency and her position on the board in a landslide. A few weeks later, life in Maple Creek Estates had returned to normal, but it was a new kind of normal. People waved to each other more. They stopped to chat on the sidewalk. The great glitter fiasco of 2025, as it came to be known, had forged a strange and powerful bond between us. We were survivors. I was in my backyard, grilling burgers, when Mr. Henderson came over, navigating around my perfectly concentrically coiled garden hose. He handed me a cold beer. "They want you to be the new HOA president, you know," he said, a rare twinkle in his eye. I laughed, a loud, genuine laugh. "Absolutely not. I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy, not even Carol." I took a long sip of my beer. But I did accept a new, specially created title. "Oh yeah? What's that?" "Acting head of the Emergency Preparedness and Anti-Unicorn Vomit Committee." He chuckled, a dry, rusty sound. "Sounds about right." He left me to my grilling, and I looked around at the peaceful, functional neighborhood. The lawns were still manicured, the mailboxes were still the correct shade of beige, but something had fundamentally changed. We weren't just a collection of houses anymore. We were a community. They say you shouldn't use a sledgehammer to crack a nut. But sometimes, when the nut is particularly annoying, self-righteous, and armed with biodegradable soap, a 1,000-gallon diesel-powered sledgehammer is exactly what the situation calls for. And I have to admit, it is deeply, deeply satisfying.